Yes, guys, welcome to SFeatley F1. It's our first ever live show on the new channel. So, yeah, and we've got the Checker Flag show from SFeatleyTV, obviously, to SFeatley F1. There are still, obviously, loads of other stuff to come. That's the temporary intro for now. But so I hope you do like it. But the permanent one will come. Don't worry, it will come. But yeah, we got Adam for DNF1 podcast. How are you, my friend?
Hi, Stephen. Hi, everyone. Good evening. And yeah, I actually like the temporary intro. So yeah, be interested to see what the permanent one's going to be like. But no, yeah, not bad, not bad.
Yeah, I think that will definitely it'll be a trailer afterwards. Like if people come to the channel, that's what they'll see. So yeah. So, but obviously lots to talk about this week. And first off, I'll start, since obviously we haven't seen you for obviously on SFeatleyTV since before Abu Dhabi, so we'll have to go straight in on that one. Like, your thoughts on that messy sort of ending to a Grand Prix?
Oh wow, we're getting straight into it and pulling the pin on that grenade already.
Yes, we're pulling the pin on that grenade. Absolutely.
It's yeah, I mean, 3 months after it happened almost, and we're still talking about it as if it was yesterday. I mean, I've never seen a crazier, more controversial finish to a Formula One World Championship than what we saw. I remember I was watching the race with my girlfriend, and it was the first race that we'd watched together. And I remember when the safety car was about to come in, and I saw obviously we all saw that notification that the safety car was coming in on before the final lap. And I said to her, I said, you are about to watch one of the most controversial yet incredible moments in sport, in any sport. And I was not underselling it at all. You know, I kind of already made up my mind in my head. I think like a lot of people did, that the situation that Lewis Hamilton had been put in was pretty much untenable. There was no conceivable way in my mind that Max Verstappen was not going to win the World Championship from that point. And as we saw what followed, Max did win the title, albeit under very controversial circumstances. I think we should stress none of his doing for once. But it's just left a huge sour taste in a lot of people's mouths over, you know, what should have been a celebration of an incredible World Championship season fought between one of the greatest of all time in Lewis Hamilton and a driver who's well on his way to perhaps one day being up in that class as well in Max Verstappen. And yet what we ended up getting was a championship decided, but a decision that will probably never be forgotten, and one that we will probably for years maybe never forget, never stop talking about for so many different reasons. And that's kind of where we are right now. We're still in the center of all that controversy. I think things have died down a little bit because we're in that lull period now. waiting for the new cars and for pre-season testing. And of course, in that sort of time frame, we will be expecting some updates from the FIA, which should hopefully give us some confirmation on what, in particular, Lewis Hamilton, or Sir Lewis Hamilton, I should say, will be doing in 2022.
That's the thing, because obviously he hasn't spoken since at all, as opposed to anything on social media at all since that race. And like, I've got to admit, like the way he acted after the race, it was fair play to him, because I wouldn't have blamed him if he was jumping out straight out of the car and pointing fingers straight away. But no, he wasn't like that at all. And I've said and I make my point. I've made my point very, very clear, and I've said it for time. And this is how it feels to me: is that no matter who is in that situation, no matter which way round it was, the FIA and the F1 were, and you can sort of trace back to the way they were handling situations between Max and Lewis. Brazil, for instance, Saudi Arabia, they were making sure they were trying to get it to as dramatic as possible. So when that situation occurred, no matter which way it was going to come down, it was going to be a last lap decider, no matter who was in charge. So no matter who was in front, no matter who was behind. So for me, it would have, the FIA wanted that ending. They wanted their ending, and that's what they wanted. And they were going to do anything to get it. So when Latifi did crash, they had their opportunity to do it, for me. That's how I feel. I feel they broke their own rules to make sure they got their ending. Because now all of a sudden, everyone can't stop talking about it. It's brilliant for the publicity, because the publicity for F1's gone through the roof, because everyone can't stop going on about it. But that's not Formula One. It's not sport. Like, what was great about 2008, for example, winning it on the last corner, was because that was, you couldn't expect that to happen. You didn't see that coming. And it's like you said, when you saw the safety car come out, you knew what was going to happen. But part of me was like, I didn't expect the FIA to do that, to get it.
Well, no, there've been questions of the FIA and the stewarding, or the quality or lack thereof, I suppose.
Because Saudi Arabia for me, sorry, I will just say, Saudi Arabia for me, how the hell do you get away with not brake testing without being disqualified? A proven brake test is unreal. Because for me, that's disgusting.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to talk too much about Saudi Arabia, because
by the way, I'm not pointing fingers, and I do say he's deserving of his championship, by the way. But it's how they were stewarding things was, he was trying to get it as in the last race, level on points. Everyone starts watching it. Everyone was doing watchalongs to it when they did do watchalongs all season. So, but
yeah, no, I hear you. I'm not going to talk too much about Saudi Arabia, because that was I think it was more of an uncomfortable race to watch, because there's so many things that were going on. Never mind the brake test incident with Verstappen and Hamilton when they came together. But yeah, there's been a lot of issues with the quality or the consistency, I suppose, of stewarding throughout the 2021 season. Track limits very much was at the center of it, and appropriate limits for overtaking. We saw, obviously, the first race of the season in Bahrain, there was a lot of people complaining about why Max had to allow Lewis to re-overtake him when he overtook him outside track limits at turn 4, and yet Lewis drove half the race outside the limits to gain a somewhat of an advantage. Again, that's all down to interpretation of how people saw it.
Again, like, there's plenty of things Hamilton's got away with in that season as well to make it close.
Well, this is it. And, what we saw in Austria in particular, there were a lot of big incidents, mostly involving Sergio Perez, over what was deemable for, what was deemable for a penalty in terms of track limits, or the amount or how aggressive someone can be defensively. And of course, we've seen so many incidents this season, mostly involving Max and Lewis. At Silverstone, Monza, you mentioned Saudi Arabia. Of course, Brazil was a big one as well. But each time, it just felt that whatever line that they could try and draw in the sand and say, this is the blueprint of what we're going to operate with afterwards, it never really felt that the stewards or the race director, Michael Masi in this case, really had full control over what was going on. And it's a very difficult position that they ended up being in. And of course, it culminated in what happened in Abu Dhabi. I certainly would not have wanted to have been in that position that he found himself in when you've got, you've got Christian Horner on the radio team, you've got Toto Wolff on the radio team, you've probably got several other team principals. I'm not really a fan of this business where the team principals can have direct contact with Michael Masi while he's trying to manage a Grand Prix. And especially in the situation that we found ourselves in. And ultimately what happened was we ended up having a very, very controversial finish to a world championship. One, as I said already, that for obvious reasons, we may never stop talking about unless we get to a position where F1 moves forward and improves for the better. We certainly shouldn't forget it. I think the FIA over the winter break probably were hoping that it could have been forgotten about. But I feel the landscape that Formula One exists in today compared to how it used to, and I'm talking social media, I'm talking the amount of media and podcasts and everything else that people appear on to talk about Formula One these days, like ours or like mine or like yours. It's just not going to be forgotten about. So we need to start seeing some improvements. We need to see some sorts of change in terms of the policy and the framework and how it's going to work going forward to try and rebuild the integrity of the sport now, because that's one thing that has been damaged more than anything else. And we'll just have to wait and see how it goes. I see we've got another guest joining us now. So
Conor, how are you, my friend?
Good. I had a client drop out on me in the last second, so I'm like, oh, I'll go join Steven.
Wicked. How? I want to. I'll quickly. I'll let you touch upon it with Abu Dhabi. What was your overriding thoughts of it?
For me, I mean, I kind of have a nice perspective because I'm a McLaren fan, so I'm kind of seeing this from the outside. I'm not really someone who's directly involved in the outcome of the race. It didn't really, it didn't really make a huge difference for McLaren that happening. It kind of just was something we were able to kind of stay away from.
Because he wasn't allowed to unlock himself, was he?
And I can get that, but at the same time, for us, going into the last race, we pretty much already lost it against Ferrari, and especially with where we were there was no chance of overtaking Ferrari for P3. So for us, it didn't really change anything, and we still ended up doing pretty decently, I think, for both of our drivers in the WDC. But I can see why people are frustrated by the last lap, and I can tell. For me, I can see both sides. I can see the FIA going, you know what? Let's not decide this championship under a safety car. Because I completely agree. I think the stupidest thing you can do is decide a championship that is that close and is tied going into the final Grand Prix on the safety car. But I can understand the frustration from Mercedes because they did break their own rule. That's what I'm saying. I can understand both sides.
We had that in 2012.
Of course.
What happened was we done on the safety car.
Of course, and I just don't think they wanted to do it again. And I think what makes me laugh and kind of just shows, honestly, the true stupidity of the FIA is that the first thing, I think it was Sebastian Vettel even said, why are we not being allowed to pass? I don't think there'd be any debate here or any upset, hurt feelings if the FIA was able to go immediately as soon as Latifi crashed and go, okay, let everybody who's been lap pass, let us reset and give it maybe one or two laps where they'd already gone through and then could go from there and actually race. But doing it where you're kind of having them go in and then immediately bringing in the safety car, I feel like definitely is something that was more on the lines of a Drive to Survive moment than it was a Formula One moment.
Yeah, that it does feel like that in a way. Conor, Adam, sorry, what do you say to that?
So, I've been when it happened, and we were talking about safety car finishes, I've never really had a problem with races finishing under the safety car. It's always been a part of F1. I think because we've had, as you mentioned, 2012 when Sebastian Vettel won his third world championship, that race ending under the safety car. Yeah, I can understand why fans would not be happy with championships kind of being a little bit anticlimactic, if you like, where they kind of end under the safety car. I think we could all agree that even if it had done, the race was practically Lewis's to lose at that point. You know, he'd done
even
so
then,
much
I will
already.
say, is that at that point they called it very late. If they called it any later, you would have had a situation where the safety car's got to speed off to try and get to the pits to give them a chance to back up the pack and let Lewis take control. But then you still got cars trying to overtake and unlap themselves, which is probably why they only did a certain amount of cars, because they knew that's the only time. It's the only, after the next corner, we've got to peel off and get towards pits. That's why the rules in place that you do on the following lap ensure
That's why
the
I think they should
safety
have
of the
called him up
safety car.
immediately. You got to call him off immediately. That's why I think as soon as Latifi crashes and you throw out a safety car, you go, okay, let them unlap themselves. You don't wait. Even Vettel was surprised. Like I think it's either Vettel or Alonso, and it's been a little bit. It's not like this has been something that
You
just
make a
happened.
decision. You're either going to
But
decide you're
yeah,
going to let them
just make the
through or not.
decision immediately. Don't make a decision and then turn your back on it and immediately do something else. If you're going to make a decision, stick to it. Have the cojones to actually back your
And
own
what's
decision
and
instead of
what's
immediately changing
worse
your mind.
is that I went on F1 TV afterwards and I watched the inside story of it. And it's not, and I don't want to particularly blame Red Bull because probably Mercedes were doing it at the same time, right? But not just you didn't just Christian Horner's little bit like piece on the radio on the TV before 30 seconds later they've changed their mind afterwards. You've had him, Jonathan Wheatley, the whole pit board was screaming at him to scream, what the hell are you doing? Get it sorted. Right. So if it was Charlie would have just had the bollocks to just go, I'm not listening to you. I'll
I
do
think
what's
just
best for
I
the
think
sport.
just the team principals being able to talk to the FIA and
I think that's
at
always been
all.
the
I'm so
way.
happy. I'm so happy that they've taken that out of the
Yeah,
sport because I
Conor.
think
I
it's
think
ridiculous.
there's always been that communication, but
Yeah,
what happens is Herbie's like Herbie will go, yeah, he's busy at the moment, and he will never get back to him. He's like, no, f you lot. I'm doing what it says in the code, what it says in the sporting code, and what it says in the regulations, because like that's what I have to follow. I don't follow what you say. You can say what you want, but I ain't listening, and that's where you didn't get so much of it. I think team principals have realised they can get certain decisions influenced by Masi because I don't think he's strong enough for me. I mean,
I'd love to see
what
Kimmy.
do you
I'd love
think?
to see Kimmy as the head of the FIA.
What do you
I
think
think
about
that'd be
that?
the funniest thing ever.
So, yeah, with the safety car thing, so at the start of the season, I remember the FIA was talking with the teams and they were sort of consulting over their view on this. And the teams collectively agreed that they didn't want races to be ended under the safety car. So, with that in mind, I can understand why they felt they were trying to get the race to finish at least with one racing lap left. The problem, obviously, was that you've got, they're trying to handle a situation where they only have a finite number of laps left to go. Of course, they have to get rid of that car, Latifi's car, relatively quickly, which, to their credit, they did. Before they could allow any lap cars to overtake and try and do what they did. It was very strange that they only allowed the 5 cars and not the others, obviously, that were waiting to unlap themselves. And then you ended up in a situation where they went from no one overtaking to only a certain number of them overtaking. And then we ended up with the safety car coming in a lap earlier than we expected. And I'm guessing that was driven by the fact that they wanted the race to end with one racing lap. And obviously what happened was they created a scenario, perhaps by not following the rules to how they probably should have been interpreted, which is another issue I think we can get onto in a bit, that saw Max Verstappen with practically an open goal to win the world championship and take it away from Lewis, who, will rightly feel that he was robbed of a world championship, not necessarily by Max, but by the FIA by acting the way they did. It was just a domino effect of one decision after the other that is questionable in its own merit that ultimately led to the controversy that we have right now. And look, nothing's going to change on that. But I think what we need to hope for as fans, the hardcore fans of the sport, not necessarily just the casuals, because we'll still be here regardless of what happens, whether the sport is, broken, the integrity of the sport is broken
That's the
beyond
thing,
repair.
Mum. For example, my mum had always been watching it and got me into it when I was a kid. She won't ever watch it again. She won't ever watch it again. She's not
And
watching it again
that's a
after
shame
that.
because,
She
you
can't
know,
trust the sport. She
no,
can't
no,
trust it.
and that's
She's
understandable.
felt that way for some time. She's felt that way for a bit of time. Like, but it's always like I said. Well, how is it Matt? I've always said, well, how is it Lewis has been able to win with so many races left in? Like, so I've always tried to disprove it. But after what I saw in Abu Dhabi, even like my mom was like, no, I'm sorry. Like unless they're gonna radically change everything in terms of the FIA, I ain't watching it.
I mean, for me, this is my
It's a
second
shame.
season following it. This is my second season following the sport. So for me, I'm rather new, but Steven knows, I've already gone pretty hardcore with, I mean, for me, I'm in the US. So for me, practices and races are from anywhere from 1 in the morning all the way to, races are usually at 5, 6 a.m., unless they're over here. But for me, I'm never going to stop watching the sport. For me, I love watching even practices. Like for me, are just a thrill to watch because so many different things can happen in practice. So many different things can happen in qualifying. I mean, we saw it. The perfect example of one of the things I love about Formula One was Monaco with Leclerc. Goes on pole, ends up crashing out, and doesn't even start the race. And it just shows, some of the great things about Formula One. And unfortunately, this season's going to be remembered more for the darkness at the very end and the stupid FIA decisions that honestly went on the entire year. Then it'll be remembered for a lot of the really, really cool and exciting things that happened. Ocon winning a race, McLaren going 1-2, and I mean, for a Haas team that was really, really bad, Schumacher got himself into Q2, which I don't think anybody in their wildest dreams thought that a Haas would get themselves into Q2 this year. And it's unfortunate that we're going to remember the very, very bad parts of the year. And a lot of people are just going to completely forget about the very, very cool and amazing and exciting things that happened throughout the season.
Helmut Marko calls Verstappen Red Bull's greatest ever drop. When you've had smashed, mate. Helmut Marko, like honestly, that amazes me what he sometimes says about F1. Yeah, but look. Anyway, like we've got to move on because there's loads to talk about in terms of the new season. Moving into 2022, new cars, new regulations. The car launches are. Let me get the car launch dates come up.
I know it's the 11th for McLaren. I've had that. It's on my calendar. I have it marked on my calendar. I'm gonna get up nice and early, make sure I've got my coffee with me.
Let me have a look. This is today. Is this today's topic? Let's have a look. This is from the Telegraph.
Well, we know Aston Martin will be the first team to break on the 10th. Then, McLaren.
Yes, so we've got Mercedes will be on the 18th, the W13, which was the first car to ever fire up. Red Bulls are to be confirmed. Maybe that's because they've been spending too much money. Sorry. Ferrari. By the way, if people don't know the canvas, I did have a Red Bull after Abu Dhabi. I put my fist through it, so you kind of saw how I was feeling at the time. February, you've got Ferrari, McLaren. Then on you got February the 11th. Alpine is the February the 21st. AlphaTauri the 14th of February. Aston Martin on the 10th, obviously the 1st. And then we've still got Williams, Alfa Romeo, and Haas still to be confirmed. So, and to give you a sort of particular flavour of what it's going to look like, I'll just have a look at the Mercedes sort of paint job, for example. Let's have a look.
Well, this one's a bit deceiving, isn't it? Because we've seen. I don't know if you guys saw that video of James Allison when he was talking about the challenges for 2022. And it shows off a mock-up of the model 2022 car, similar to what we saw at Silverstone, the one that the digital concept that we're seeing. And they've gone with, as you can see, the black and green livery, or the black and green blue, whatever you want to
They
call it.
went with the 2021. They didn't go with 2021.
It's gonna be, yeah, but it's gonna be. I thought it was gonna be silver this year, so I'm a bit.
I'd love it to be a silver. I feel like if you're gonna be the silver, if your nickname for your car is gonna be the Silver Bolt, you have to have it be silver. You can't just go with the black and the green.
Yeah, the reason they've been going black and green, obviously, is because of is for social injustice, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement and the social injustice that Hamilton's been fighting for. So, hence why they've been going black and green for a while now. So, part of me likes the thing is I like both, and I probably like the black more, to be honest. Like, if I'm truly honest, I prefer I like the black livery. It looks sweet.
Oh yeah, it looks very, very nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm expecting to see a silver McLaren. Silver McLaren, a silver Mercedes.
It's like that.
I'm going proper nostalgia here, seeing a silver McLaren like the old days. But yeah. I mean, to be honest, it doesn't matter how it looks as long as it's quick. I think that's going to be the important thing next year.
That's the important thing.
You know, there's going to be quite a variety. You know, one thing that really stood out to me was at Silverstone earlier in the season when they showed the model 2022 car, and all of the team principals or some of the drivers that had seen mock-ups or designs of what their cars were going to look like. And all of them look rather perplexed. They're all looking at it like, oh, well, our car looks nothing like that. So for me, that's quite encouraging, because I think what we were worried about is these 2022 regulations. And bear in mind, we're talking about, I mean, Adrian Newey, I think it was, that said that this is the biggest set of regulation changes that we've seen in 4 decades, you know.
No, I'll ask you later on SFeatleyTV. It's the wrong channel for this one, mate. Not anymore.
Oh God, yeah, we ain't gonna get into that one.
By the way, if anyone doesn't know who Adam is also an Arsenal fan. So, we both share each other's pain.
Not necessarily the views, but pain definitely, as we all Arsenal fans do. Onto more positive things, but yeah, I think it is encouraging that we're going to see quite a few different concepts. I think the worry, I suppose, for next season, or what happens after that, is because of how tightly wound and loophole free it seems that these regulations are going to be, that we could end up with a 2022 grid with 10 different, you know, parity in their performance, parity in how they look. But then come 2023 or 2024, these cars are going to look very, very similar, because there's not much wiggle room to, you know, change the style and improve how they're going to perform.
That's the thing. I think
Aston Martin's going to love that.
I think they said after the
designs.
I think it was after Qatar or Saudi Arabia. I think I don't know where it was. I think it was after Qatar, actually. I was watching Ted's Notebook, and they were talking about the 2022 regulations, and they said that they've asked because they were going to be apparently so much slower, that they asked for some bit more freedom with the regulations. So the FIA has sort of said, yeah, all right, we'll let you have some freedoms here and there, so that they won't be as slow as they were going to be, as they'll be probably about the same, maybe about a second slower than what they are right now. So they've given them, I think, some leeway, but then again, they have to be sort of like that in a sense, because it does feel like it's supposed to, obviously it's supposed to help the smaller teams like your Williams, your Haas, for example, to be able to stay in the sport, afford it, and be able to challenge and compete. Because at the moment, Haas can't afford to compete. They can't afford it. And if we want to stop seeing drivers that are getting in the sport because of money, because of money behind them, instead of the talent that they have, like Piastri, for example, is not in it at the minute, then we're going to have to move towards a more regulated system where you only get a certain amount of upgrades each time, because otherwise teams won't be able to afford the amount of money it's going to cost to keep up with competition. And that's the whole point behind it, I think.
Well, we've got the cost caps for next
Yeah.
season, which I believe are around $140 million. Although,
They came in last season, though,
yeah,
didn't
no, but last season we did as well. It was 145, but then of course the teams were given a bit. I think it was up to $500,000 allowance on because we had the sprint races. So
Oh, yeah.
I know there was
There's
a vote
only
at
six this weekend, isn't there?
yeah, well, there was a vote on it last weekend that we haven't heard the results of yet. Where we could potentially have sprint races on the calendar for next season. Ideally, 6 is what I've been hearing. We may not, because there's been a contrast over the amount of money that some of the bigger teams have been requesting, and an additional allowance of up to $5 million. I think one team was asking for.
Red Bull probably.
Yeah, well, according to Zach Brown, he mentioned one team in particular. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Red Bull.
So these are the sprint races they're
Hmm.
proposing. So there's one in Bahrain, round 1, then round 4 at Imola, round 9 in Canada, round 11 Austria, the Dutch Grand Prix, and the Brazilian Grand Prix.
I can't wait for us to have Canada back. I see. For me, since this is my 3rd season now following, I haven't seen an Australian Grand Prix yet.
Yeah.
I haven't seen a Canadian Grand Prix yet. There's races that have been on the calendar that I've still yet to actually see.
What I will say though, if it stays the same at the top, God help us, because every time there seems to be a sprint race, right? Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen seem to have this magical concept of coming together.
Yeah,
Right?
in the main race.
Bottas will
Yeah,
somehow
you know
win
what I
with Alfa Romeo because he just continues to have somehow this magical touch when it comes to sprint races. He just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to be the one in the lead here. I'm
Yeah.
actually kind of curious because I know you said like it's going to become by 2023, 2024, very similar cars, not a lot of big difference, which I think favors Aston Martin because we know how much that Aston Martin love copying off of other ideas.
Mhm.
But that's a story for another time from a while ago. But I actually think there's a lot more chances for differences than people think. I know one thing that's come up recently with the new 2022 cars, especially for McLaren, is that the suspensions can be a little bit different. There can be a little bit of change in what kind of suspension they go with. I know it's been rumored heavily that McLaren's going to be favoring and most likely going with the pull rod suspension this year instead of the push rod suspension, which causes issue for Ricciardo, who's always had a trouble with them. And it's already being kind of, I've heard some rumors that this may be his last year unless he really is able to be putting in consistently really good performances and being up there in the Drivers' Championship, which saddens me because I think Ricciardo out of the sport of Formula One is a huge loss. Just for the atmosphere that and the personality he brings, it's a huge loss. So I think there will still be enough differences to be separate, but I think I agree it will be very similar, but I still think we'll find major differences from car to car that may start separating it.
For anyone that doesn't know, I'll quickly just skin read some of this. I'll skin read as much as I can. So to promote, this is the first time we've got a set of regulations, and these are massive changes. These are in terms of making the car, instead of making the car the best for the team as fast as possible for the team to get, it's about promoting better racing for everyone. So to get them as close as possible and be able to follow closely so they can overtake each other. So it's all about making it better racing. So like the numbers, for example, at the minute is 47 meter, 47% loss at 10 meters with the current F1 cars. These cars are at 10 meters only 18% losing what they call their effect in terms of aerodynamics, which means they can follow a lot closer. So there's also wheel covers and that to help with the airflow. 18-inch and low profile tyres, which you can see here. Oh, they look stunning, don't they?
Bigger tires and closer together so Aston can take more people out when he finally spins out again.
A new front wing and nose concept, and plus also the aero feature from the 70s is back in terms of ground effect. I believe that is so.
Yeah, I
Which
mean, I'm looking forward to seeing how
yeah,
ground effect has progressed over the last
it,
40 or so
but it's going
years
to
in
be
the
more
sport since it was
regulated, so
banned.
it's more safe
Well, yeah,
this
of
time.
course, because I mean, the biggest problem that we had, particularly with the Lotus 78 and the Lotus 79,
Yeah,
that they really championed this with Colin Chapman with those designs back in the late 70s, and you know that was instrumental to those cars winning world championships for the team back in the
championship
late 70s. But of course, as you mentioned, Steve, and the reason why they did outlaw it back in the early 80s was
because
purely
they
and
went
simply
overboard.
because of how inconsistent and how unrefined some of the technology was for some of the lesser teams that would spin out at high speeds, you know, because they weren't able to accelerate the downforce enough through the Venturi tunnels underneath the car. So I'm hoping, and I'm sure we all are, that these new cars, I imagine with 40 years of development, not necessarily in Formula One, but the understanding on how downforce works and how to generate downforce and get the airflow to move faster underneath the car through these Venturi tunnels, which of course we've seen a lot. Um, it's going to be very, very exciting. Cornering speeds are still going to be very, very good. They're still going to be sluggish at slower speeds because the cars seem to be getting heavier and heavier. And unfortunately, guys, we're never
Yeah,
going to be going back to cars weighing as much as a toaster as they did in the early 2000s and the late 90s when they were quite narrow. They're going to be wide ones. Well, for lack of a better way of putting it, they're going to be wide and heavy for the foreseeable future. But what I am looking forward to seeing is, you know, because the aero is going to be so much more simple, it's going to be a bit more elegant looking to a degree. We're not going to be seeing veins popping left, right, and center, or aero pieces, you know, everywhere to make the cars look as radical as possible. But I am quite intrigued to see in the radical designs and the contrast in designs concepts that teams go with, because as we said already, and as James Allison said on that video, and I recommend anyone
yeah,
to watch it who hasn't seen it already on YouTube, with James Allison, a
yeah.
guy who I could literally listen to talking about Formula One cars for hours and
He
hours and
makes it
hours
very
on end.
simplistic in the way he describes
He
it.
does, but and that's kind of his job, I suppose, to kind of break it down for us regular people that don't understand aerodynamics quite as well as someone of his expertise,
Before you
obviously.
just go on further with that, I'll just quickly go through the other little points as well. Don't forget we've also got E10, which is the more which is basically ethanol. 10% of ethanol will be run as a biofuel. It must be a second generation biofuel made in a sustainable way, which means zero carbon footprint. And that's obviously researching to try and find a basically a biofuel which would move us away from oil for the foreseeable future. The safety on the forefront of the design, with uh, the engine will be separate. The engine will have to, in an accident, separate away from the car in a safe manner without exposing the fuel tank. Following Romain Grosjean's crash in 2020, uh, there's also increases in terms of the amount of, I think it's 50% more energy on front and rear impact tests, and there are also static squeeze tests they have to do as well. And as you can see, that's what they're trying to stop
And I
from
think
that.
I agree with Adam. I think it's kind of unfortunate that we are kind of seeing heavier and heavier cars. We're not going to really go back to
Yeah,
seeing but I think in terms of the difference in safety for the cars, I think it ends up just being a better move overall. I remember when I first got into the sport, there was the whole, I still like, whenever I looked at Formula One controversies, the first one that came up because it's the most recent was not just, you know, the whole pink Mercedes thing, but the absolute hatred of the halo when it was first introduced. And it was
oh
first brought
mate,
into the scene,
yeah,
and it's
we
just
did.
ended up
No one
being,
liked it.
and it's ended up being absolutely amazing for the safety of the sport. And I think it's unfortunate because we are seeing a sacrifice in,
Well, you can
you
you
know,
can look back
ability
as far
and
as
speed
Monza, like
and
for
weight, but
example.
it's huge.
You could look at back as far as the Monza Grand Prix, where if it weren't for if it weren't for that the Halo, Hamilton would have been fighting in Abu Dhabi. He would have been dead, or
Yeah,
very
so I think
seriously injured.
I think it's unfortunate that we won't see lighter cars,
And
but I think the
yeah,
differences that it
Adam,
brings and the safety that it brings kind of has
you're
to be.
going back to your point on what you were saying about the ground effect before. Just had to make those two other points about the F1 2022.
Yeah, I mean, as a whole, you know, ground effects or the change of front wings and rear wings, of course, it's all just going to be one element rather than the panels that we are known with. It's
Yeah,
still going to have DRS. I think that is still going to be important because I think it was Lando Norris when they were asking him about his thoughts on the new cars. You know, would they help promote better overtaking? In a nutshell, he did say that it probably will. You know, there's going to be less effect on downforce. You know, less of it's going to be lost. They reckon up to 10% compared to the same distance for a few car lengths where they were losing as much as 55%. So that's going to be important. He did say, however, that DRS is still going to be important because there's going to be less of a slipstreaming effect because there's going to be, because the parts are a bit more
yeah,
simple, there's going to be less of it that's going to be affected by the drag. So what that effectively means is that, you know, the cars generally, the car in front, if you like to think of two cars following each other, the one in front is still going to be subjected to drag, but not as much drag
yeah,
as they would have
because
been
you haven't
subjected to
got
in
so
previous
much
seasons.
downforce being generated.
Exactly. There's always that coefficient where you kind of have to balance
Yeah.
between drag and downforce. And of course, the more downforce you normally put in your car, that results in more drag, which means a slower
But
car
that
in
would
the straight
also
line.
make the DRS system less effective as well, because
Well,
like
no,
if you think of
this is it. Because you know, and the thing with the DRS system is that with a draggier car, it will be more effective because you're removing that drag, that air resistance, if you like, by opening that slot in between the rear wing. What the point Lando was making is with these cars with reduced drag and reduced effectiveness on the loss of downforce, you're going to have a car that's still going to be quite quick in a straight line, but the car in front loses less of an advantage than it used to because it's not as draggy as it used to be. So DRS in this case would be less effective than it would
that's what
normally
I'm
be.
saying, it
So
would be less
Basically,
effective because that's what I'm
it's
saying.
gonna
When you
still have an
release the drag
impact.
reduction, it
Yeah,
it
it
still will.
interrupts what
It still will.
still
that's
I
has
what
that
think
I'm
impact, but
saying.
it's gonna be harder. It's not gonna be just super simple every single time. Oh, I've
Yeah,
got
but
DRS.
that's what I'm
I'm
saying. It's
instantly
like
gonna be
this
able to pass. It's
the
gonna be a
drag
little bit more
reduction
difficult.
system.
yeah,
I was thinking of it is because obviously the more drag you've got on a car, if you set up with a higher downforce car, for example, and someone set with a lower downforce, the guy who's got if you both have the same hang on, if you both have the same like low downforce setup, for example, right, he's gonna be quick in a straight line with these cars, right? But then also, uh, um, you're also gonna be uh, when you release the DOS system, you're gonna find that I'm not actually accelerating that much faster than he is. I might be doing about 5, 6, 7, 8 mile an hour faster than he is, but not that much, right? So in the end, like drag reduction system becomes an effective product of overtaking than it used to be because the cars are so much less draggier and produce so much less downforce on the front and rear wings, especially on the rear wing, which is where it releases its drag. So
I think this is going to turn it to where instead of if you're within a second, you're pretty much set to be able to make a pretty good pass most of the time, especially on the longer straights for the DRS system. I think it's going to actually make it to where you're going to really need to be closer to the car, a lot closer to the car in front of you this year
yeah,
than in years past if you really want to make a simple, easy overtake on these long stretches. Because if you're a
that's
second
what
back or nine
Max will be
tenths,
two
you're
car
not
lengths
making it
away and
by.
he'll just dive down the inside. Like
Yeah, so I think you're gonna have to be I think within 6 tenths or 5 tenths of a second to
yeah,
truly be able to make the kind of passes with the DRS that was being made just last year when you just got within a second.
yeah, and that's the thing, and it'd be interesting to see how it plays out. So, and you never know, it might be completely opposite. It might be a completely artificial, make it completely artificial, which is not what we want either.
well, I mean, what they ultimately want to happen is they want to see this season coming that the reliance on DRS becomes less and less significant. So they want the cars to be following
Yeah,
each other quite closely, which I think hopefully we will see compared to this previous era of racing where, you know, it was downforce, 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 get these cars breaking lap records left, right, and center. And ultimately that was always going to hinder the racing. DRS was a good way to mitigate that, but ultimately we saw what the problem was, and that's why we've got the regulations that we have right now. The problem is that what we want is DRS to become irrelevant. We want to see racing to the point where if we get a scenario where the cars get close to each other and then every time DRS is opened, it's a slam dunk overtake, which I think, if that does happen, people might think, oh, well, I'm not really happy that as soon as you get DRS in someone, they've got no chance to defend. Because then what will happen is that DRS will be outlawed. And then hopefully what you'll get is a nice happy medium where you can follow closely to the car in front, but still overtake, providing, still overtake without having to be a second a lap faster than the guy in front.
Wouldn't it be an idea? Because the idea is then if you outlaw it, you might also then struggle to overtake, say, in places like Monaco, for example. Whereas if you do get such a system where it's been so artificial, like if you get to Monaco, it will give you half a chance of making a pass, like into Sandoval, because you're still accelerating, like not even into eighth, only just into eighth gear when you get to Sandoval. So, like, when you say that, I would say maybe for certain circuits, like Monaco, you might still need it, for example.
Well, Monaco's always been a race in isolation that has never. It's more about the spectacle and the glamour around it rather than a
It's
show.
going to be an interesting race where we're going to see tons of overtakes.
Well, I mean, this is it. And as I said, because the cars are getting bigger and bigger, it's becoming even more difficult to overtake around Monaco than it normally is. I mean, I think there was one normal overtake that I think happened in that race, and we didn't even see it because the broadcaster switched to Lance Stroll hitting the cars over at the swimming pool section.
Yeah,
so,
I think that was Schumacher on Mazepin, wasn't it? Over the hairpin.
It was Vettel and Gasly, I believe it was.
Okay, because I remember seeing. I remember
Gasly coming out of the pits.
Okay, because I could have sworn I saw. I could have sworn I saw like an overtake that was because I remember I watched like they were going over the year like the Formula One drivers doing a
came out of
review.
the pits. He was just in front. Gasly was side by side and going up Beaurivage, going into Massenet, and then I think Vettel managed to hold on to the position in the end, going into Massenet.
Yeah, I mean,
by the way,
yeah.
another thing I missed out: barge boards, which are like the pieces of panels that you usually see on the side of a car. They are gone. They are not there. They are not allowed. Out of here. See you later. Sayonara. Good night. So that's another significant downforce advantage that caused a lot of problems in terms of like dirty air.
But we saw how significant it was because, I mean, the Hungarian Grand Prix where Max Verstappen basically was driving half a car, he'd lost pretty much on, I think it was on was it on his right side where he'd lost practically all of that bargeboard area. Well, he lost practically all of that bargeboard area and he was struggling and he had probably as much downforce on his car.
He did not notice that I called Bottas later and paid him. Like, I paid him off.
So, Adam, do you think that now with the new regulations that pretty much makes Monaco it's basically going to be impossible to overtake unless it is something like we saw last year with Hamilton dropping down so many places because of pit stops? Do you think it's more going to come down to pit stop strategy, or is it going to be still an ability to actually make passes on the track?
I think Monaco, they need to have some special tyres to make it 2 stops.
Well, I mean, it was already going to be impossible to overtake
one
anyway.
Stops all the time, you're never going to get any overtaking. I think it needs to be 2 stops, or you make the law 2 stops around Monaco as an end of it. Open up the strategy.
So you think just make it a pit stop strategy instead of an actual real,
Yeah, because you're not going to get overtaken. You're not going to get overtaken. That's the problem. And
this has been the issue with Monaco since its inception. I mean, who remembers was it 92 where Senna's all over the back of Nigel Mansell, or sort of vice versa? Sorry,
that's
he couldn't overtake him there.
I remember when Hamilton pitted in 2015. I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Even if you've got dead tires, like, just you're in front. You don't need to worry. You could park and have it. Like, this not happened in 2019, I think, when he was defending Ricardo. Or 2016, sorry, defending Ricardo. 2019, he did 69 laps on tyres that were opposed to the last 50 laps old. And no matter what Max Verstappen did, who was Max Verstappen, by the way, he would happy just send it up the inside for some reason, and he did actually. He wasn't going to get past. And, it's sort of like, if you have track position, no matter how slow you are, you could literally just park up, have a cup of tea, read a newspaper whilst you're driving, because the guy behind you is never going to pass you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those races. As I said, you know,
Yeah,
DRS or no DRS is always going to be impossible to overtake. It's probably not going to get any easier. I will say that because the cars hopefully will be able to follow each other a bit better, I don't know if that's going to apply so much to the slower corners. Not so sure.
yeah,
It's one of the hallmarks of the old Abu Dhabi layout that was heavily criticized. The fact there were so many
yeah.
90-degree corners, particularly in the first sector, it kind of rendered those long straights that followed it redundant because you just couldn't
Yeah.
get close enough on the rundown anyway. So I'm hopeful that these regulation changes are going to make a
Now,
big difference
but
in the
then to
show.
be honest, now I wish they did use the old setup like they did in the F1 game. It were already
How do you mean?
55 laps.
How do
So
you
that
mean?
means if Latifi would have crashed on lap 55, it would have been done.
Oh, right. I see what you mean now.
Just saying.
Yeah. No, I mean, when it comes to the new cars, as I said, James Allison was talking about this, and it's going to be interesting to see how these new cars. I mean, I've not looked forward to seeing a
Yeah.
set of cars any other year than this one. I think what's going to be interesting is to see who's got it right. You know, a lot of people have been talking about this
You got to
lottery
get it right.
that anyone could be the fastest going into the first race. I'd be very surprised if that was true. I mean, yes, we're operating in a cost cap era, so the financial advantage that some of the larger teams would have over the smaller ones is nowhere near as large as it once was, but it's still quite significant. You've got the resources already available to them, the facilities that they have, the staffing that they
Yeah.
have, the knowledge that they have. Um, those things, you know, you can't buy with. I mean, you can buy with money to a degree, obviously, but because they're already in
And there's a
place.
lot of good sounds coming out of Mercedes already.
A lot of people have been talking up
Not
their
just the
cars. I
firing of
mean,
the engine.
Mercedes have been talking up their engine. Ferrari have been talking up their engine. I mean, there's been a lot of interest on Ferrari
I think it's
because a
not
lot of
just the
people.
engine though that they've been talking
No,
up
no,
as
no,
well.
of
They've been
course not. But
very
We like Mercedes talking up their
fast.
engine because that's where we're getting ours. So hopefully, if Mercedes. That's the
well,
thing is like if Mercedes is fast, that means McLaren's going to be fast. So I kind of have to take it as it comes.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I'm
shush.
expecting Mercedes to be the benchmark because of where they left. I mean, the engines aren't changing too much. Yes, they will be upgraded, but I think reliability is going to be important. As Stephen mentioned earlier, with the change to the E10 fuels from E5 that we've seen, obviously that's going to cause a loss in horsepower, which the teams will have to recover, which I believe that Ferrari have certainly recovered that. Mercedes believe they recovered that. Red Bull, they feel Honda have managed to recover most of that. We'll wait and see. We haven't heard anything from Renault on that front, so we have to wait and see what they say.
Oh mate,
Um,
they're like a giant tinderbox. They are.
I have
You
no
don't know
faith
what
in
year you're
Renault having
fighting in.
anything this year. Honestly, that's the one power supplier that I really still believe is going to be a big hindrance for those that are still having that in their cars. And I think that's where we might see separation is those that are going with a Renault engine versus going with a Ferrari or Mercedes engine. Because I think Ferrari will make
I think it's only
decent
Albon now
leaps.
that have the Renault engine, isn't it?
well, I think Renault, yeah, Renault are changing their layout, so they're adopting the sort of the twin turbo at the front concept that
Oh,
Mercedes
that Mercedes
has
used in
championed
2014.
for some time. Ferrari have gone a different direction. They've gone for a more radicalized approach, which is either going to pay off really, really well for them, and it has to, mind you, or
Or
there's
it's
going
going
to
to
be some
cost them
reliability
money.
issues for
Yeah.
them, which is going to hurt them for not just 2022, but every year up to 2026 when they have the engine because of the engine freeze. So it's going to be very important. I think what we're going to see next season are the teams we expect to be at the front, the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull. I'd be very surprised if those aren't the two teams leading the pack. We might get a surprise from midfield. I expect Ferrari to be a lot closer. How close? I'm not sure. Same for McLaren as well. Because this year, this will be the first time that they've been able to properly develop their car because they weren't able to do that last year at all. So
Indeed.
The first time they'd be up there since they got rid of Hamilton.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll see. Aston
Yeah,
Martin.
I'm excited but nervous because we do, like you said, have a lot of ability to actually improve this car this year. And I remember watching a whole video at the end of this year and the beginning about how little ability. I think I remember talking to Steven. I talked to you about it. Just how little they were able to change.
Yeah,
like they were basically able to just put the engine in and change the back of the car.
In the regulations, they're only allowed a certain number of changes per year.
Yeah, so we were left with basically our 2020 car plus the new engine and a little bit of a change to the rear, and that was it. So yeah, Adam, I definitely agree. I think it's going to be interesting. I think The nice thing I think that's going to happen, though, is we're going to see just as tight of a battle between Ferrari and McLaren for that third spot as we did last year, maybe even closer of a competition, because it's going to be so,
Oh,
like
to
you
be
said,
fair,
kind
if
of
you're up
everybody's got
there with
similar
Red
cars.
Bull, if you're up there with Red Bull, Mercedes, then it makes it even better because you got 14 fighting for it. So
Well, I mean, there's no reason why they shouldn't. I mean, there are going to be some components like the brake ducts, for example, just picking one out at random, that are going to homologate into these new cars. You know, they are brand new cars, but not every single part of the car is
no,
brand new.
no,
So there will be certain facets that will be helpful. But as I said, because of the scope of the changes, yes, it's possible that we could get a midfield car. I'll pick Alpine as a random one that, you know, they're quite bullish. L plan, if you like, hopefully going into action for them for Fernando next season, could put themselves in a position where they may have found something.
Aston Martin with the facilities
And
they've been
yeah,
constructing.
maybe we'll see, but they might have found something. The hard part for them is going to be maintaining, and any midfield team that finds itself at the front is going to have a hard time to maintain that advantage because the development rate for these cars is going to be quite rapid. That's why I think a lot of teams, Ferrari mentioned this in particular, why they expect the gap to be closed to 2023, where almost every car is the same to some degree. So that's going to be something to look out for. So I'm not expecting Haas to be turning up to Bahrain, locking out the front row with Mazepin and Schumacher. I'm not expecting anything like that at all. I hope for their sake they're going to be more competitive.
Yeah,
But you know, whilst I am excited, I'm going to be more intrigued to see who's got it right and who's got it wrong because somebody's going to get it wrong. I'm just hoping it's not Ferrari, of course. But after all the hype and anticipation building up to
I
this
hope
season,
it's
this is
Red
a
Bull.
big year.
I really do.
I'll be surprised if it's Red Bull. I'll be surprised because with Adrian Newey involved, I'll be like, "There's no way
Hey,
that man
that's what we
can
said.
design a
Hang
bad
on,
car."
I see. For
swear,
me, I really hope it's Ferrari.
I
I hope
swear,
Bonazzi just absolutely screws it.
but I swear, when the 2014 rules came in, no one probably could quite believe that Red Bull were gonna fall like they did. Like so, and don't forget they spent a lot trying to win the title in 2013, the year before, and completely have not really. I think they sort of they didn't really check on. They didn't check on Renault of what development was with their engine until they realised, oh shit, it's too late. Oh
Well,
You,
there's only so
I,
much that they can do. I mean, Renault weren't performing as good as they could have done. Yeah, you know, 2013, Seb won what 9 races in a row the second half of that season. And the car was very good, but the car's changed quite a lot with the blown diffusers and how they were made. They weren't cars that Sebastian was able to get up to speed with straight away, but the Renault engine or lack of the power compared to Mercedes, it was never going to be able to compete. Mercedes got it spot on. They'd spent 4 years of development on those engines before they'd even come to fruition, and they spent the rest of the turbo hybrid era
I
improving.
swear they only came out with this saying they're
Yeah,
going to
something like
change
that.
in
Yeah,
2012.
do you
yeah. I
think
mean,
I got a question here? Do you think for me, and
We've got
I've got a
move on
nickname
in a
for him.
minute because we've
Yes,
got to move on to about Michael Masi.
Steven knows my nickname for the Ferrari, the head of Ferrari. He knows my nickname. So if Ferrari get it vastly wrong this year, do you think the fat wears Waldo Bonatti is going to be out as team director at the end of the year, or do you think they're going to continue to give him a chance? Because for me, after how terrible they were in 2020 with the consistency, if they get it wrong again, especially at the start of this new era, do you think that's reason to
Peter's
concern
gone.
that may be looked at where the head of Ferrari may be looking to possibly be gone?
well, Masi Binotto has been heavily involved in this 2022 project, as expected. Ferrari have gone through a huge raft of changes. Obviously, Louis Camilleri leaving the team, retiring, obviously leaving it down to just being run, you know, elsewhere. And, you know, they've obviously had Laura Meeks in charge of the race, as the de facto team principal, if you like, at race weekend. So there's a lot of pressure on this project to work out well as far as Mattia Binotto's future is concerned with the team. I have the utmost confidence that it will be a success relatively. How successful that is, we'll have to wait and see. But as you said, if it does go wrong and Ferrari find themselves not necessarily not at the front, but if they find themselves going backwards, I think a lot of people at Ferrari will be looking at possibly replacing Matty Binotto. You know, he's done a
For
great job to
sure,
get the
mate.
team to the position that they're in, despite the struggles that they've had over the last few years. But this is the step that Ferrari need to take, and there's no excuse. Bear in mind, they have a history of underperforming Ferrari quite, for the last decade and a half since they've last won the World Championship in 2007, constructors in 08. Ferrari have underperformed quite a lot. So
Yeah.
they need to put that right. There's no excuses for them. They've got the facilities, they've got the money, they've got the resource, they've got the people, they've got the driver lineup, you could argue, to a degree, that could put in a challenge for a championship, maybe. There's no reason why that team
Well, they've
can't
got
be
a driver.
successful.
They've got a definite driver.
You have two. I think you have Charles and
I'm
Sainz.
not going to write off Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz is a great driver, but Leclerc, for me, like, I just feel he has that just edge. Even though Carlos Sainz
He
had
needs
a
to
better
clean up.
season in general,
He needs to clean
I
up
do.
though.
Yeah,
I think
he does
Charles
need
needs to
to
clean
clear
up. That's the thing with Charles and
But
with
then, to be
Lando
fair,
both. I
he's
think their
been,
biggest thing is they need to clean up
to
this
be
next
fair
year. Both
though,
made mistakes
like,
that could have been
since
avoided.
but then to be fair, since last season though, he's had to sort of lead that team, like, at a young age. So he's had probably a lot of pressure to deal with at Ferrari, right? So I'll give him that. And I'm glad that Sainz is there because it sort of helps him share the load a little bit. I think also the spotlight's still a bit on him because he's a Ferrari Academy driver as well. So, but we've got to move on to Michael Masi. Obviously, with all the controversy we talked about earlier, could he be out the door? Could he possibly be out the door? Before I get into Conor's thoughts, I know Conor would love to rant and rave about him for about half an hour. Adam, what do you say? Like, with Michael Masi, do you see him being replaced as the race director for this season? Is it untenable now?
I think there's a growing possibility that is going to happen. From what we understand, Mercedes, two of the things that they
Is it just
lobbied.
because of Abu Dhabi, or is it because of previous incidents?
Well, I mean, as I was going to get into, the FIA updated their org chart in January, earlier this month, and two names were omitted from that list, and that was Michael Masi, the race director of single-seater racing, and also Nicholas Tombazis, the head of technical regulations for single-seaters. Now, I'll start off with Nicholas briefly. The reason why Mercedes is obviously very, very unhappy with him and want him gone is they believe he played a huge part in the regulations being changed in 2021, which of course hindered them quite a lot. There weren't big changes, but they definitely affected Mercedes a lot. And of course, the intention, I believe, was that they wanted Mercedes to be pulled back to make the championship more interesting. Now, people will say that that's bad for F1's integrity. It's happened a lot. Whenever you get a situation where there's a team dominating, as we're seeing right now with Mercedes and Ferrari in the past, or McLaren in the past, in the 80s, or Williams in the 90s, there are always going to be technical changes made to try and slow that lead team down, to try and make the championship more interesting. And it makes sense. It's a business, it's a sport. They want to try and sell this product to fans. It's going to be a hard sell when we already know who's going to win when we turn up to a race weekend. But at the same time, Mercedes were obviously very, very unhappy about that. They obviously rightly felt that why should they be punished for the fact that they're doing a considerably better job than everybody else? But that's Formula One for you. That's how it goes, unfortunately. But they want him gone. They've had qualms with the FIA for some time. I think since Mugello, if you like, last season.
I get that, but like I said, it's not just that. I think there's other reasons as well. When you're saying, for example, letting out all cars through and taking extra time at the Ivor Grand Prix, and then you don't do the same in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
Well, I mean, Nicholas Tombazis doesn't play a part in that. I'm talking specifically about the cars. But with Mercedes and the FIA in general, I mean, I'll get to Michael Masi in a moment, but with Mercedes and the FIA, they've had qualms with them probably as far back as Mugello last year. Do you remember in that race where they said before the race itself, if there was a safety car, because of the run down from the final corner to turn one, that long left-hander that runs down to turn one, that you're going to end up with a situation where whoever's leading is going to have to back the pack up at the start-finish line, which could cause a Constantine effect and lead to a crash. Because the race leader has no choice but to back them all up until they cross the line and then go to avoid being overtaken into turn one. And what ended up happening was Valtteri Bottas was leading. He ended up doing what he had to do as the race leader, and you ended up with a crash with a few cars at the back, like Grosjean, Giovinazzi, a few others. And the FIA kind of waved off Mercedes' warning before that race and said, no, we're not going to bother. They're talking rubbish or whatever. So Mercedes have kind of had a disdain for the FIA for some time owing to this. Now, when it comes to Michael Masi, his name was not included as the head of single seaters for the FIA org chart as far as January. Now, his position wasn't exactly filled by someone else. He just wasn't in it. So it leaves it open to interpretation. But I think today, it actually come out with Peter Bayer, who's a senior FIA official. He mentioned that Formula One race director Michael Masi could be replaced in 2022. And I think, again, this kind of plays into what Mercedes would have wanted following what happened in Abu Dhabi, what sort of agreement that they came to with the FIA in terms of their demands of what they wanted the FIA to do going forward. It's possible, it's likely that Michael Masi being removed from that role was at the top of the list. His position, to a degree, has become untenable, not necessarily because of what he's done personally, but because of so many inconsistencies with the stewarding this season and the lack of control. And it's obviously culminated in what we saw at the end of the season. So it's a really tough call.
Letting cars out
Yeah.
as a track on.
Well, right. Yeah, if you like, you can go far back as that. But this season
That's
just
what
gone.
I'm saying.
You know,
there's not just that. Everyone thinks it's just that Abu Dhabi or Grand Prix. It's not just that. That's just that's just something that's had a huge and lasting effect that's going to be remembered for a long time because it's decided a championship. But this has been going on for a while. This is like Norris getting a penalty for shoving someone off the road, but then when Max Verstappen does it in Brazil, it's not a penalty. Right? So,
I mean, you can throw it both ways with Lewis basically using turn 4, I believe it was, and going basically off track and gaining an advantage every single time. He did it for 75% of the race, and Max does it once to keep the lead, and it's, that's a penalty now. There's got to be, and that's why I think, even though this may be a Mercedes-led, revolt and end up, getting him thrown out, I don't think any team's really going to complain because I think every single team's been hosed at one point or another by Masi's incompetence.
If you listen to everyone's radio during that Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, everyone felt, not just Max, not just Lewis, but Sainz, Vettel, Alonso, big names were all sitting there saying, "What? That's not fair." They all felt like they were on the wrong side of the FIA, all at the same time. So, which is pretty difficult to do, right? To be honest, right? So, and if you're having that, and you're getting to a point where even Alonso's coming out and saying this ain't right, this is not how you do stewarding, and you also come out and you say, like, you've also got George Russell. I know he's a Mercedes guy. People are going to say, don't listen to him. It's because he's Mercedes. That's why he's saying it. But hang on. He's also a director of the GPDA, so you do have to listen. And he's come out and said after that Grand Prix, what's happened there, right? He's not spelled out that Lewis losing the championship is disgraceful. He's saying, basically, what's happened with the safety car situation, right? And only letting so many cars through is not on. Like, it's like bending rules is not on. Like, so, because we don't know. And it was like after Brazil, and they decided, oh, that's not you've run someone completely off the road. You've hardly turned into the corner, yet you don't get a penalty for it. I'm sorry, that's where everyone's just gone, well, how do we fight then? How do we defend? How do we attack?
So Adam, I'll throw to you. What do you think percentages, out of 100, what do you think the percent is that you think Masi does not start the Formula One season with a job in the FIA?
Well, I don't necessarily think he won't be working with the FIA in terms of being the race director. Based on what I'd seen today, those comments from Peter Bays, I would say it's probably a 90% chance that he will not be the race director this season. The problem, as I said before coming on, Stephen, the problem that the FIA find themselves in owing to this situation with Michael Masi is that it's very easy to make him the scapegoat in the fundamental issues with the FIA. And, we can talk about rule breaking or not interpreting the rules properly or Article 15.3 or Article 14.8. No, they do need to be rewritten, and I think they will be. It's going to be because, we saw deliberation with Red Bull and they were saying, any could, doesn't necessarily mean all when it comes. And that's a fair point. you know, whether you like it or not, they're there to
And like I
defend
said, in
their
F1
driver.
Grand Prix, Masi was saying we got to let all of them through.
Yeah, but
So,
this is what I mean. You know, if from a legal
yeah.
perspective, we'll never know how the
Do you
case would have
think
gone if Mercedes challenged it.
if Mercedes took it to a court, and obviously, by the way, they couldn't have taken it to a court because it would have gone to the ICA, which is like the FIA writing its own homework, as they said. So they did have the structure to be able to win either way. And even if they won, what are they going to get? They're going to get a change of result?
Well, it
No.
wouldn't have happened. There's no
It-
It wouldn't have
regulation.
if
happened.
someone
So there's no precedent for it. But, like, unless you do something completely unprecedented, then it could cause even more controversy. So, like, and probably damages the reputation of F1 even further. So, like, no matter what they did, and I think also, like, as much as they said, they did say they didn't want to win it in the courtroom anyway. So, like,
Yeah, I mean,
as
with
much,
all due respect to Mercedes and Toto Wolff, I don't believe that for a second that they weren't.
yeah,
They were trying to. They withdrew their. No, seriously, because Toto Wolff obviously
no, I agree.
from his interview with I think it was Craig Slater of Sky Sports, he mentioned that getting what's right and getting justice are two
it
different
was press
things. And
conference.
I think it was the one that's and for me that tells the whole story. Whilst he will go out and say Mercedes withdrew this appeal or protest, if you like,
Yeah,
on the
if they
day of
had
the
a,
FIA
yeah,
prize for the good of the sport. I don't believe that for a second. This is not to knock them, because I'd feel the same way. But the problem they faced and what they they realized very quickly is that when they knew that there was no possible scenario, even if they'd won in a court with the FIA judging
it
its
would have got it
homework, if
changed.
you like, it wouldn't have changed the result. And that is the only reason why they went out to protest. Of course, you want to preserve the integrity of F1 and you're fighting for justice, etc. But at the same time, the reason they're going to war in court is to try and get the championship awarded to Lewis, in what
Yeah,
they deem
but
to be the right
say if
way.
they didn't, say if that wasn't about winning, and they wanted to do it for example, they took it that far because there needs to be fundamental reworking of the rules and like a major overhaul, and now it's regulated in Formula One for that standpoint. And they're saying, for example, we're not here to change the championship decider, like that's done. We're here because as the integrity of the sport needs to be there needs to be a complete rewrite of the rules, especially if you're going to start attracting new fans to the sport. Because a lot of fans that started tuning in, which is about most of the people that have ever viewed apparently, which is great numbers, but most of them, and like I said, for example, my mum, for example, I said before the show, like they don't want to watch it, and mum's watched it for years, but they don't want to watch it because
Okay,
they don't know
I
what
got a
to
couple
believe.
more
They don't know
questions
whether it's
then.
fixed.
Hmm.
They don't know whether it's fixed. They don't know whether it's real. They don't know what to believe.
Well, I mean, I'll touch on that briefly, and then obviously, we'll move on to the other questions. But the ultimate reason why Mercedes wanted to withdraw their case, other than the fact that they were never going to get the result changed, which obviously swayed their decision, they obviously felt that it wasn't just about Michael Masi or the FIA not following the rules to the letter or the way that they're written, but fundamentally, the rules were written in such a way that it left itself open to such an interpretation that we ended up with a result that we did,
Like,
and the FIA considered it to be legal. That's the problem. So if it had gone to court and we'd found that the FIA or Michael Masi didn't follow the rules properly or broke his own rules, the rules are still flawed. He just didn't follow them properly. So that's not exactly, that might be winning a small battle, but the bigger picture that Mercedes are hoping to try and push the FIA towards with this new stance that
It's
them
stupid
Lewis
because
taken,
you've
that's
got,
what they want.
it's like we said before the show, you've got a rule saying 15.3 saying he has overriding control of the safety car, which is what everyone said, which basically says he's got a free right to do what he wants.
Hmm.
Right? But then you've also got 2.1 where it says it has to be followed, the regulations have to be followed by the people stewarding the Grand Prix. And they have to try and stick to these regulations to as close to the letter of the law as possible. So you've got one rule saying you've got to do what the regulations say, and then in the next minute you've got another rule saying you can do what you want. Like,
No, but this is the
it's
argument, Stephen. This is where people will argue to a degree that what Michael Masi did was within the rules. Now, that's not a popular opinion, but that's one that some people will hold with that in mind. So that's where these fundamental changes to the way the rules are written and to the point where we don't end up with another scenario like this are paramount.
Basically, they're not black and white. They're
No,
not black and white.
It's more of you can say that, and I'm one of those people who says that he was completely within the rules to do it. Do I agree with the decision? Do I think it was a right decision? Do I think it was a fair decision? Absolutely not. But if you look at the rules, he is within his rights in the rulebook to have made the call he made. And that's why Mercedes decided to back down from their appeal. Because in the end of it, it's going to come out that he was within the rules when the rulebook was put. I mean, I think I saw about 50 tweets with the rulebook posted copy paste over and over again from about 50 different people right after Abu Dhabi.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean it's not a screw up.
Overnight, yeah,
it doesn't mean it wasn't a screw up. But he was within his rights to do it, and that's why Mercedes backed down, and that's why no one really – there's nothing really that can happen anymore. I think Max deserved that championship in the first place. Do I think he deserved to win it like that? No. But I think in the end, if you look at it, Max deserved to have his first world title.
I did see Max Verstappen bring out his new helmet, apparently. Like, with obviously he's going to wear #1 on the car. I
think it's kind of jokes. I think it's just a shithouse move, honestly. I think I actually kind of funny.
I don't think it's a shithouse move at all. I mean, I know what you mean, but he's won the championship.
Yeah, he knows he's right to wear it.
But
look,
he's all of those rights.
Look,
sorry?
what I will say is, what I was tempted to say is like, as much as he's got #1 on the car, you can put Max Verstappen next to it. Has he got in brackets courtesy of Michael Masi?
Well, so I think someone did an edit where they put a Michael Masi photo in the background of the video. Yeah, but this is the thing. I do feel for Max to a degree because I don't want.
Yeah, that's not.
People,
as much as
people can say what they want to say.
It's not fair.
No, but it's not like some of the past ones that we've seen. But no, I actually thought it looked quite cool, the crash helmet. I like what he's done with it this year, where he's replaced some of the red tinges with gold. And I'll be honest with you, as much as 44 is synonymous with Lewis Hamilton, whether he's champion or not, I am looking forward to seeing someone drive around with a #1 on their car.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it's something where we can look at it, and we can make all the jokes we want about Masi. And I think, unfortunately, and the thing that makes me sadden the most is that, and I'm not saying Steven, it's led by, this isn't an attack at you. It's being led by Mercedes saying that this is not a legitimate championship. But when you really come down to it, I mean, yeah, there's one bad race, but if you look at the rest of it, both sides were, Mercedes had favorable calls, Red Bull had favorable calls. Toto Wolff was in his ear, Christian, or as you like to call him, Karen Horner was in his ear.
Michael Masi's Christmas present.
But I really hope that in the end this isn't seen as an illegitimate championship, because I think Max fully deserves to be called a legitimate champion and deserves to have that title.
That's what I said.
As much as it would happen.
And you had me after after I calmed down from the day before, like from the day it happened, I was just mad with everyone, and I said afterwards, and I said in my review, I said, look, I don't agree with the decision. I feel that that it's been fixed to try and get their one lap ending, no matter no matter who was second, who was first. That was all they were going to do.
If it would have happened the other way around, it would still be crap. It was a crap decision either way to do what he did, no matter who was in first, but who was in second.
But all the same decision. But,
of course, no. It would have been Christian Horner complaining and saying that's just not right. It's just not right.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, and probably I think Christian Horner will try to take it to court, to be honest, because that's that sort of person. I think Toto Wolff is a little bit more. He's a little bit less.
Be careful with how you go forward here, Steven.
He can be like Christian Horner, but not as bad.
I think they can just be bad. They can be just as bad as each other, honestly, and that's why I think it's perfect.
Just as bad as each other.
It's perfect that they're not allowed to talk to the FIA anymore, because it's just
if you're going to say someone
ruins the sport.
But if you're going to say someone that's going to make a spat out of the media, you're more likely going to put your money on Christian Horner than Toto Wolff, to be honest.
I think one thing I'm looking forward to this year. I'm trying to see what the over/under is going to be on the amount of the Bose headphones that Toto Wolff's going to throw. How many apologies does he have to make to Bose this year?
As much as I said, I don't agree with it. right? And with the way that the race went down, like Hamilton deserved to win the race. Yeah, right. How Max deserved to win the championship, fair, right? But and that's what I always said to him. I don't hold anything against Max because like it's like he deserved to win the championship,
Yes.
and also like it wasn't his call. But in the end, the way sort of
He profited
Hamilton
from a call that
drove,
he didn't make. He
yeah,
profited from a call he didn't make. But I'll
yeah,
pose I have a couple more questions. They're my last questions, and they're kind of going off of hearing what Adam you said about it being 90% chance that we won't see Masi return to that director role. So for me,
yeah.
it's
So we got to wrap
one,
up.
who do you think is, and have you heard anything of who's favored to then overtake that position? And then two, is Masi being replaced more needed, or is it honestly more of a need that we see a very much a revamp of the stewards and how they handle things? And do you see that happening as well?
In answer to your first question, I honestly wouldn't know. I've not heard anything about anyone being lined up to replace Michael Masi. I'd imagine it would be internal. It'd probably be someone promoted into that role. I mean, there's a few candidates you could chuck in to that. Someone like Alex Wirtz, for example, might not necessarily be a bad person to jump into that role. So honestly, I don't know who is going to go into that role.
Needs someone who's a strong character, like
It
a
does,
Charlie
but the
White.
problem is, does such a character exist?
Yeah,
We're talking about replacing the person that
I think there was
replaced Charlie
one.
Whiting.
There
I
was
think Kimi
one,
and Vettel would
but
be
he's
two great
now
people to have. If you want to have
yeah.
a former
But
driver do it, you
there
have
was
Kimi and Vettel do it.
there was one. I think just before. Sorry, I think there was one 2 years ago. I think it was just before Charlie Whiting died. But unfortunately, instead of the FIA snapping him up, he was snapped up by Ferrari. I can't remember his name because I remember he's mentioned in a WTF1 podcast I was watching. I can't remember his name, but
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, I think he would have been perfect because I
Do you
remember
also
watching it
see
back.
as a steward revamp because of how bad the steward? Because no matter what you think about the
There should be
FIA, the
one set of
stewards were
stewards,
also
I feel.
terrible. The stewards were awful this last year, and I think everybody can kind of
Right.
agree on that. That it was awful hearing anything from the stewards. I remember, of course, I'm going to be a little bit biased here in Austria when Lando got a 5-second penalty that I think honestly cost him second place in Austria because of him pushing Perez off the track. At turn 4. And then there was consistency, but it was also kind of consistency with really, really bad calls.
Well, it's a tough one because one of the things that Michael Masi and the FIA went with, particularly following that race, was that situational or circumstance would not be relevant in an argument of track limits or how hard can you race someone and what Lando was punished for, whether you agree with it or not. And the big reason why they gave Lando a penalty in that situation and why Perez got a couple of penalties afterwards for the same thing was that the gravel on the exit of turn 4 in Austria was a relevant factor. And it kind of went against the whole mantra of circumstantial awareness or situational awareness is
What
going to
you
be
do then?
relevant. Because in Brazil,
Hmm.
with Max Verstappen and Lewis, where Max forces Lewis wide and Max doesn't get a penalty for it, regardless of
But
whether he
that's
makes
not even. But the thing with Max is, it's not even just. Sorry, it's not even just like. It's not even just like you forced just that car off the road. You've forced into a point. You've nearly like. One is if there's a barrier there. You're both in the barriers. Like it's both of you have gone off the road
Well, no,
completely.
I mean,
So it's clearly
yeah.
that you've decided that you know you're not going to make the corner, right? Especially at the angle you're turning in, right? Trust me, like even in a game you have to turn even fucking more than that for that corner. Like and how was the onboard, which apparently wasn't available, was not more evidence to prove that was the worthy of a penalty.
That's what I'm
Not
saying. It was either the thing with the
astounding.
stewards was it was either bad calls were being made, or it was consistency with it was consistency in bad calls, or
But
there
sorry,
was zero consistency on some. That was the thing is you saw a lot
yeah,
of bad calls, and it was either that they were purely bad calls, or they tried to show
yeah,
consistency and every single one was consistently just a terrible call that was completely against what should have happened.
Sorry, Adam, I was but I had to cut you off there.
Yeah, no. The point I was going to make was that you had that situation with Lando and Perez in Austria, where of course they didn't say they basically said that the gravel trap is irrelevant in making that decision. And I thought, well, it probably should have been relevant, because if you force someone off wide there and they end up going off the road the way they did, it does affect the other car. So it probably should be penalized. But then with the Max Verstappen example with Lewis forcing him off the road at Brazil, they didn't give him a penalty, but they also said, well, because there's an off-road area that they could both run off to, it's okay. And I think, well, hold on. You've basically said that the gravel trap in Austria is not a relevant factor for giving a penalty or not.
Why is it not?
Exactly. You can't argue yourself out of that situation when you're creating a mantra to follow on, saying that the circumstance you find yourself in, and I think it's ridiculous. I think you have to take the circumstance into account, because we saw the same thing happen when they came together at Monza, which I still thought was strange to give Max a penalty for that, because you had the sausage curb there that was going to be a factor, and then what we saw at Silverstone and other things. Regardless of how you saw it, all those incidents in isolation,
it's got to be
consistency has been the problem, and
it's got to be good consistency.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be fair, like you saw that penalty with in Italy, and then it was like, oh, that's all right, we'll just take an engine penalty because we're not going to take one. Well,
yeah, but then we start going into the realms of, I mean, I'll be honest with you, Stephen, when people were complaining about that one, I thought was ridiculous, because, and you'll know about this well, Conor, like McLaren back in the Honda days, Alonso had so many grid penalties that he was accruing from penalties in one race and then engine penalties. He should have started the race in a different city, let alone.
Oh, absolutely no, and you're absolutely right. For me, I think
that's why started in Paul Ricard in France rather than in Belgium. Like,
that's for me why I think that, honestly, if you look down to the nitty gritty, I don't think Masi's the full problem here, and I don't think it's going to get better now that Masi's gone, because I think the bigger issue is the stewards and the consistency of them. Of the consistency of them making bad calls, or the inconsistency of not holding them. And we saw it with Masi. Masi is kind of just like the scapegoat for this entire thing. But he shows exactly how bad the FIA and the stewards were, because they are so good at going back on their own word, or saying something so hypocritical just to help their own agenda and to help something not be called when it was called earlier. Like you said, Adam, between Brazil and Austria, we see them, and then we, of course, then saw it again in Abu Dhabi, where they are very consistent in being okay being hypocrites. And it can't happen anymore, because stewards are deciding too many things. We saw with Lando. Lando, like I said, I think that 5-second penalty puts him in second. Him having to do that 5-second stop-go, I think cost him second place in Austria, because I think he would have been ahead of Bottas if not. But for me, that's the bigger problem. I think Masi's just a scapegoat, and him leaving is going to be fine. I think it's going to be great, because I think he honestly deserves to go. But I think the bigger problem here is that we have stewards who don't know what the hell they're doing, and they're so wishy-washy with what they're doing that they'll immediately try and think it as the thing that's okay, and then they'll change it 2 weeks later.
Joe, I think it feels a bit like in the football to me, because you get different referees, for each game, and it's their interpretation of the rules. And I think the stewards, they take their interpretation of the rules and what they want in racing, and that's why you get different decisions, I feel. And that's why you probably get one decision one week and one different decision the next week. So maybe there's a call to say you got the same race stewards for every Grand Prix. I don't know.
I mean, the only danger with that is it depends on their stance on how they judge things. I mean, if they judge things too harshly and fans want them to be a bit more lenient, and you're taking them around, it will be consistent, but it just won't be the consistent people want. I've not got no problems with having different stewards at different races. I get why they go with that. I think the problem is that in certain situations, it's not necessarily the inconsistency of the decisions that they've made. It's the inconsistency in the approach and the rationale for why they've made those decisions. As I mentioned, my early examples, and what we saw in Saudi Arabia, a lot of people were getting annoyed at the fact that Michael Masi was offering a deal to Red Bull over what should happen. To be fair, under the circumstances, I understand why he did it, because there was no possible way that Max could give the place back. There wasn't any time to do it. So I understand why he did it. But the problem is because it was stuff being made up on the fly, and people weren't exactly happy with that.
And then you forget about Esteban Ocon.
Well, I mean, Ocon benefited to a degree, but ultimately it didn't matter because Max got the pair of them at turn 1 on the restart. But that all aside, you end up with a situation right now where I think going into next season, it's going to be so important that Mercedes keep the pressure on, and Hamilton as well. I don't believe for a second that Lewis Hamilton's going to walk away from the sport. I really, really hope that I'm right in this, that he will definitely come back. But they have to take this strong stance that they're taking, where Lewis has pretty much gone off the face of the earth in doing his own thing. Good for him, fair enough. Just to make sure that the right changes are made to preserve the integrity of the sport, because going forward, the FIA cannot be allowed to think that you can just forget this, or that people won't care in a few months after it's happened.
Yeah.
They need to be constantly reminded, and it's not just Mercedes that have to do this. Everybody else has to chip in as well. That they need to
You
make.
can't just have the top two leading. You can't have one or two teams being the only ones that are leading this attack and saying that this is wrong.
Yeah.
Because like I said, it's affected every team at one point or another in the season. And I'm going to give you two referees that I think show like the consistency differences. You'll have one week, you'll have someone like Pierluigi Collina, who's just, as we know in soccer, the greatest referee of all time.
Yeah.
And then, next week you'll have Martin Atkinson. And the next week after that, you'll have Stuart Atwell. And then you'll have Mike Dean. And it's just, you go from one race having these, because there have been, I think there were races that there were stewards who were absolutely fantastic. I think you had some races where the stewards were absolutely on point, made the right calls, had good reasoning behind their calls, and did not affect the race in a bad way. The outcome effect was right. But then you had some where it was terrible, where bad things decided the race, or bad calls were made with no consistency. Baku's exactly. Great calls, consistency. There were explanations that made sense behind their calls, and even though it did affect the outcome, it affected the outcome in a way that it should have been because they were the right calls to make. But then you have something like Abu Dhabi or Brazil or Austria where the consistency just isn't there, and it affects the race in a bad way.
And this is what I said. Like, if you wanted the spectacle you wanted and the ending you wanted, Baku should have been the way it ended. For me.
Absolutely.
Like, if you could do it for Baku, you could have done it for Abu Dhabi. But he took this stance. I'm not taking a red flag, no matter what the situation is at turn 14.
Absolutely should have red flagged it. I think if you red flag it, you give both of them a chance to get new tires. Because that gives Hamilton new tires, and then it's
there's no arguments, there's no controversy.
It's brand new tires, and they both get to go. Basically, who is the better driver? Who's going to get it? Who's going to make it stay?
Yeah.
I will say my unsung hero of the season. I think my unsung hero of that entire race got to be Sergio Perez. I think a lot of people focus on what happened at the very end, but a lot of people forget about the fact that Sergio Perez, I think, did one of the him and Alonso, I think, had two of the best defensive performances.
I still feel that if Hamilton if it was because I think he had an 11-second lead, so and he lost about 10 seconds. I still feel it had just been underneath the pit window, so you wouldn't have had the pit window to get in and out without Max.
I think Perez got to get respect for what he did.
Then again, when the safety car came out, he would have left time under the safety car, so maybe he would have, but you can't ever tell. But we're going to have to wrap it up there. Conor and Adam, it's been great to have you on. First live stream on the new channel.
Yeah, exactly.
I know there's a load of SFeatleyTV stuff here, but that's all going to change over time, so don't worry, that will change in time. But I'll let everyone shout out their socials. Conor, where can they find you, my friend?
On Twitter, I'm under Yank Talkin Smack, which should be my name on here right now. And then, of course, I do appear on. I'm kind of a traveling talking head, even though that is technically my YouTube channel as well. I haven't posted in like 7 months. I do a lot of work with the Man United Agenda. I do a lot of work with Steven and Rich Sports as well. And then I help lead the Blue Podcast, which is we're just finally coming back and starting to put videos out again. So, but I love it. I love what I do. It gives me the chance to kind of be able to kind of have a schedule that I make my own instead of having to try and follow one, because it gets a little difficult with me with the 8-hour time difference to you guys while also working. It's a little difficult. It's just about noon here.
you're going to be helping a lot around this channel, especially for the new season. So really do appreciate it. Also down below, guys, what's down below is obviously SFeatleyTV like banner below, but going on below. But do go and check SFeatleyTV. Go and subscribe. Do check out Limited Distributors because this channel does support it. It won't support it as much instead of all the money or 80% that is, which what SFeatleyTV does. 50% of any money raised here will go to the charity, but it's still doing so in some way. So please do go and support it. And Adam, where can they find you, my friend?
So they can find me and the rest of my team at DNF1. Obviously, we've got the handle DNF1 official for our Instagram and also our Twitter as well. And we are perilously close to 500 subscribers. So yeah, thank you very much, Conor.
It's a fantastic channel. I gotta say, I've been following you guys for a bit. It's a fantastic channel. Please, if you guys like Formula One, go follow it and go put the bell on because it's an absolutely fantastic channel to follow.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Appreciate that. But yeah, as I said, plenty to come this year. Obviously we've expanded the team. We've got a new member, Lee, who's offering some great insight and good stuff to work with. And yeah, we're really looking forward to the next few months as the F1 season gets underway. Plenty of good stuff to talk about and a few little extra videos as well. So yeah, if you're interested, go check us out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can find him here whenever he's available. He will be coming on here giving his thoughts and his views on F1, right? In a very, though he's an Ferrari fan, he's a very balanced, fair opinioned guy. I'm probably a bit more biased myself, I must say.
So he's not like Brethren.
Oh, Brethren, yeah, me and Brethren are like he's Red Bull. It was like last season.
Oh, it's legendary. Adam, I don't know if you've been around for those fights between the two of them. Brethren and Steven, when they get together.
I have heard it can get very feisty. I imagine it would have been feisty last season.
Oh my gosh, I loved Silverstone was a great post race stream to be on with the two of them.
Yeah. I've got to admit, I think I finally convinced them that it was mostly Max Verstappen's fault. But yeah. So anyway, anyway, yeah. Make sure you go and subscribe to all of them. Hit the like and share button, and yeah, please do hit the like and share subscribe button to SFeatley F1. We are 23 subscribers already, so if you haven't subscribed already, I know there's 105 people following on Twitter already, so if you are following on Twitter, please do go and subscribe right now. 107 followers, so yeah, please go and subscribe to it right now. Go watch this back, and this is the new home for SFeatleyTV's F1 content, and we'll be going live for every car launch. We'll be going live for like pre-testing reviews because it's a pre-testing session, I believe.
Let's wait till Barcelona though. That's freaking morons.
Then pre-season testing, we'll be doing live streams for that, and then we'll be doing obviously your usual live content and also any extra vids as well. So make sure you all tune into that as well. And yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Until whenever I've got a chance to upload again. But until then,